Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to talk about the Standard Life Investments Property Income Trust. We know it as Slip It, a bit easier, less of a mouthful. And everything I'm going to say really is already in the title. It's an investment company, so it's not an open-ended vehicle. That means you buy and sell shares on the London Stock Exchange rather than buying units and giving me cash to invest when I don't necessarily want it and taking money out when I prefer you didn't. So a slightly different situation to some colleagues who have a harder life than I do. The other bit which is in the title, obviously, is income. We are very focused on delivering income to our investors. Current yield is just over 5%, and we pay dividends quarterly and try to cover that dividend with 100% cover. Now, how do we do that? We invest in commercial real estate, so offices, industrial logistics, and I'll say the word, shall I, retail, and a diversified approach to it. So we've got lots and lots of tenants, 217 tenants, investments throughout the UK, and I'll come on to the spread a bit later. We also use a bit of debt in the structure. Our current loan-to-value ratio is about just under 25%. It's quite an attractive pricing. Now, it might shock you to think that I am the face of Slip It. It doesn't take much for what my colleagues look like. But actually, one of the reasons the trust works quite well is that I've got a great team working on it. I've got some fantastic asset managers who are out meeting our tenants, discussing their needs and making sure that we own property which meets occupiers' needs. A fundamental process we go through. But also I benefit from lots of knowledge being part of a large organisation, Aberdeen Standard Investments. We have someone sat on the floor who's an expert in tax and structuring. Not great for Christmas party company, but really good when you're wanting to buy a SPV or something which holds a building. We've got guys who, if we're going to do refurbishment, will make sure that we get the right contracts in place, etc. So huge amount of knowledge in the building which I can make use of. Actually, I better not be rude about accountants either. One of the best things we have is an accountant aligned to the fund who makes sure that we have money in the right place to when we're going to buy a building. Sounds very simple, but if you leave it to someone like me, I'd get it wrong. So I've got, we normally get things right because of him. And I don't know if everyone saw our annual report and accounts, but we're very proud of the nice pictures and everything in it, and that's due to him. Now, sector allocation. I mentioned the word retail. Retail obviously is going through a very difficult time. We sold out of retail effectively 3 years ago as part of de-risking the portfolio, so we've got about a 9% exposure. Now, my real claim to fame is that I've had no CVAs in the portfolio. But I should be honest and say 2 people bypassed it and went straight to administration. Luckily, we've relet both of those units. One of them at the same rent, and we had 3 tenants wanting to take it. We actually let it to B&M in the end. We decided their covenant and prospects were better than Iceland and Poundland. And the other was actually an old Maplin unit, which we've let straight away, but at a slightly lower rent. We quite like the retail we've got. We keep asking ourselves, should we have any retail? But actually, retailers still need to sell goods, and there's quite a few retailers need to do it from physical stores. And in fact, what a number of retailers are finding is that if they close too many physical stores, online decreases as well in that area. And so we concentrate on affordable, a theme which will probably come through later on in some of the things we're looking at on the purchasing side. I believe that if we can provide affordable retail which works for the occupiers, then if one occupier fails, there'll be another one there. So that's worked okay for us. Obviously, we've got an overweight exposure to industrial and logistics. I am delighted to say that some of it isn't just parcel delivery. Some of it actually is industrial. I've got a great tenant who moulds aluminium, and they just won a contract recently to do the footplate for the Raptor truck. Now, they are the only people in the world who could mould that in one piece. It makes you feel a bit proud about British manufacturing and technology, engineering. So we've got quite a mixture in there, but a lot of it is urban logistics, smaller units. I'm getting a bit worried about the big box market, so the 500,000 square foot storage units, Those seem to be struggling a bit to let up at the moment compared, so we've got smaller units. And then I've got a data centre. Obviously, as everything moves to the cloud, they're doing really well. And some leisure. So in North London, Wood Green, I've got a cinema, and underneath it, some restaurants. I use the word restaurants lightly. It's McDonald's, Wetherspoons, Nando's, and then there's a little Sainsbury's as well. So we're not doing much for the health of North London, but the tenants trade exceptionally well. And then we've got offices. Now, I think offices are really interesting at the moment. There's as much change in offices as I think there is in retail. The way people work has changed a lot. Now, I missed the presentations earlier, and I don't know whether people use that word millennials, and how they're different. So for a millennial, they actually want to work in an area, in a building where they can get out of bed at about 10 o'clock in the morning, and they're still at work on time. Oxymoron or not. But, very different mindset. So what we're having to do is make sure they don't own cars either. So we have to be close to transport hubs, close to housing. We've got to provide them with experience and amenity so that they can get their flat white at a moment's notice. And actually, we're now starting to put in space which can be used for yoga, fantastic showers and changing facilities, which I thought was always because they like fitness and they'd want to run and cycle. I was actually talking to a few of them in a building in Reading, and they said, no, that's a load of rubbish. There's a great nightlife, and we need to spruce ourselves up before we go out. So we provide them with the opportunity to do that as well. And in fact, it's quite interesting. I'm sat on a group, or leading a global group across our offices, looking at best practice in how we supply offices. And we've been concentrating very much on, making sure we've got the coffee machine and the breakout space and so on. But we're now trying to think about things like, where do we put plants? Because people are more productive if they see a bit of green. And we've done a few surveys where in some buildings we put real plants in and some plastic plants. It makes no difference to how people feel. They just like the fact that you ask them if they felt better because you did something. So the whole psychology of occupation of offices is quite interesting. And then regional allocation. I'll be honest, I don't really care about regional allocation, and I hope I don't upset too many people in the room, as long as it's not Wales. Really, what I want to do is I want to buy in areas that people want to occupy, and where there's not a huge amount of land available or planners who are going to allow development anywhere. So one of the reasons we're more focused on the southeast, obviously, is land's a bit more constrained. But we like to go to places where we understand why a tenant wants to occupy and have buildings that people want to occupy. Now, I'm going to show off a bit about how good my team is on asset management. One of the things which I think is really important is that we engage as principals direct with our tenants. If you get a letter from your solicitor, do you reply to it, from someone else's solicitor, do you reply to it yourself, or do you get a solicitor to reply? Generally, you get a solicitor to reply. If I send an agent in to see a tenant, the first thing they do is appoint an agent to deal on their behalf. That's two people who make their living out of arguing with each other and justifying their fees. If we can go and see a tenant, we can understand fully what their needs are. An example here was, this is a building which I refurbished in 2014, and though I say so myself, I did a pretty good job on it, okay? And the tenant loves it. At least that's what I understood. And last time I'd seen them was about 18 months ago. And then one of my colleagues had been in to see them 12 months ago, and then we had a little reshuffle of organisation of the team. I said to a new colleague, right, I'd like you to go down and see how great I am at refurbishment for a start, and enjoy this building which the tenant loves, and just chat to them about their lease event in 2 years' time. They had an ability to break their lease and leave. And so she came back and she said, your refurbishment was okay. Not brilliant, but okay. She said, you're right, the tenant thought the building was brilliant, but they don't actually need it anymore. They're downsizing. So they're going to sublet it. Now, if we got that information through an agent, etc., then generally we don't understand the full implications of what the tenant wants to achieve. But what we did, we turned around to the tenant and said, well, I'll tell you what, now we understand what you're doing. Why don't we help you? Rather than just collect the rent for 2 years and it's your problem to deal with excess space, we'll appoint an agent because our letting agent is better than yours. And we proved that to them because within 3 weeks we found someone who wanted the whole building. They took it on a new 10-year lease, the higher rent than the old tenant was paying. So Recur, who didn't get to downsize, they had to move out. We agreed for them to move out. They paid some of the incentive for the new tenant to move in. So I've now got longer secure income at a higher rent. I quite like that. So obviously I've picked the best example I could find out of all the portfolio to share with you. But that's what happens when we go in and we have conversations. We can retain tenants. And as we're in a period of uncertainty, which I think is going to continue, sadly, tenants are very happy to retain their existing premises if they work for them. Moving is really time-consuming. It's expensive. It's disruptive. And if you're going to move, you've really got to move to better quality. And given that nothing's been built for the last 10 years, there's a very shortage of real quality. So if we can engage with people, we can extend leases well in advance of expiry to give us a certainty of income and a growth in income very often. So we trade quite actively in the fund. We like to consider ourselves to be active in everything we do with the fund. So we were the first to come on shore as a REIT and trade under the tax structure of that. One of the things we do quite often is trade where we want to sell an asset to take profit and reduce risk, and I'll give a couple of examples of that in a moment. And then we like to buy assets which we believe are going to really add to our future income streams. An example of that would be Hagley Road in Birmingham. The Hagley Road isn't the bonniest spot, and I'm not very good at buying buildings which photograph well. The marketing team hate me for that generally. But this is a building where there's a tram line going in Birmingham, which is a requirement of them holding the Commonwealth Games, and they're actually on-site building, so very different prospects to the Edinburgh tram, which obviously took much, much longer. There's a tram stop going in outside the front door of this building. This building is rented at about £13 to £17 at the moment. If you go 5 minutes walk away, people are paying £25. And then if you go another 5 minutes walk, they're paying £35. So we've got really affordable space where someone else is spending billions of pounds on infrastructure improvement that I can benefit on. I quite like it when people spend lots of money for me to benefit. So that was part of the thing there. And actually what we're going to do is improve the ground floor amenities, so really nice coffee, yoga space, more showers, etc. And we think we're going to be able to move rents into the low 20s within about sort of 12 months. So that's quite an exciting one for us. That's our biggest asset in the fund. And then I bought a building in Edinburgh, which is where I live, and it's always quite nervous when you know that your boss is going to walk past it every day. But one of the reasons we knew this was going to trade quite well is we've got Tesco's on the ground floor, and my deputy fund manager, Ollie, gets sent there by his missus just about every night to get milk on the way home. And he says he's always got to queue for the checkout, so we reckon it's a good trading Tesco's. And then the offices above have been slightly unloved. There's a vacant suite on the top floor, and you walk into it, and you've got a fantastic view of the castle out of one side of the windows, and the Penton Hills on the other. It is gorgeous. But the carpet has got a couple of stains on it. The toilets, without wishing to lower the tone totally, it could do with a good scrub up. So obviously we can do that really easily. We're going to see rental growth. Again, this is let at rents of low teens. Actually, any comparable space nearby has been achieving high teens. So we think there's great prospects for rental growth with a bit of love and attention. So very excited by that one. Once we let that space up, the yield should be up in the 7%. And then selling. So I've managed this company since August 2006. I know I don't look old enough. But since that time, we started off by, I held it for, been involved for 6 months, and we sold a third of the portfolio in the summer of 2007, of assets which we felt price didn't reflect risk. And so we were very fortunate. We held cash through the downturn. We managed to reinvest since. One of the lessons I learned through that downturn was it's all very well me standing up saying about how much money we're making for investors as valuations rise. But if anything happens in the economy and the valuations fall, that erodes quite quickly. So every now and again, we like to take profit on assets, to realise the uplift we've had, and then reinvest it into something which we think can perform better in the future. And so the logistics unit in Derby, I like sheds, I like logistics. And this is a gorgeous shed. It's got all the right number of doors, it's got the right yard, it's high enough. It's the type that you walk in and you just think, I like the shed. But the tenant there is storing and distributing boilers, and it's got a German parent company, and when we engaged discussions with them about what they were planning for the future, they said, we really don't know. We'd quite like, if we could, to have a more flexible lease with annual breaks because we might move away. And it was a big chunk of rent, and I couldn't cover my dividend if they left, and it took me a year to re-let the building or something. So we thought, well, let's take the profit. And so we sold it out at a yield of just under 6%. It returned just over 12.5% per annum to us since purchase. And actually, we've reinvested the money into a purchase, which I didn't have on the previous slide, because we only completed last Friday. I did my presentation last Wednesday, and I thought it'd be bad luck to put it in before we actually completed. But I bought logistics unit up in Aberdeen, 7.75%, let for 9 years to Schlumberger, who are a great covenant. So we're very excited by that. We've been able to replace the income very quickly and still have a bit more money to invest into another asset. And then Milton Keynes, not quite such a positive story, in that the reason I decided to sell out to that one is Bong, not quite as exciting a company as you think it might be. It manufactures envelopes, before anyone was wondering. Now, obviously, manufacture of envelopes is not necessarily a growing business. And when we went to speak to them, we were very worried about their future. And we felt this would be difficult to re-let. It would require a lot of capex. And so we sold out a yield which normally we'd find quite attractive, but we felt that yield was under real pressure if they left. So luckily, it's done okay since purchase, but not as well as we'd have liked. So the return, the grey is the market, the light blue is NAV, and dark blue is property. So to try and give a comparable. So luckily, what we've been doing has been working for a bit. Fingers crossed, or touch wood, that lasts. And then ESG was something I wanted to have a bit of time, and I'm looking at my clock, and he talked about ESG. So I don't know how you found, but in the last 6 months, everyone talks about ESG the whole time. And we've been focused very much on the E for a while. So I've done a lot of photovoltaic solar panel installations on my units. I'm selling the power to the tenants. So I get an attractive income yield, normally around 7.5%, as well as ticking an ESG box. So we've done that. That's passé now. We've actually made sure that we've got LED lights, passé. E is more or less done. And I think we're spending too much time focusing on it, because our tenants, our occupiers, are very much in the S. And that social is as much well-being as anything else. So air quality, making sure that their staff can be as productive as possible. So we're trying to make sure that we do that, and that's partly going back to these, putting plants into buildings, having yoga space, having good facilities for them. But then it's other things like using our reception staff. Do you remember the days when you used to walk in a building and there'd be someone sat there in a sort of a woolly jumper with a hole in the shoulder, reading the Sun? Well, we try now to get people to come from hospitality, to welcome you into our buildings, to greet you, to make it a nice experience. But they also try and engage with a community spirit in the building. So one of the things we might do is have a week of collection of second-hand clothing so that people can bring in anything they don't want, and we can then distribute through to a charity. So trying to help where we can with some social and community building within buildings. My asset size is as such that I can't really go out and provide a children's play park of 100 acres. So we leave that to someone else who can do that type of scale. But we try to create, as I say, this sort of community. And ESG is now a full part of our investment process. It's quite funny. At the moment, I think we think of it as a separate thing. It's just now it has to be integrated. and real estate has been probably slow to do that. So I've got 1 minute to go through a summary, which is we've got a very clear focus on income. We believe a diversified portfolio of real estate let on good leases to good tenants is going to continue to provide us with a sustainable and predictable income. We've been fairly cautious in our outlook, so we've taken some risk off the table over the last few years. And with that, we remain relatively positive. So that's me. Thank you.